Puts on a bit of footwork and then he runs straight into big body. Farmer silly. Oh, and absolutely hammered there. Oh, and there's another big tackle. Go, man, go! Straight into them. Line up and he ran straight.
Time to talk all things Super Rugby with Fox Sports commentator Greg Clark. Clarky, good to see you. I guess an interesting weekend with our first ever Super Time encounter and the long-awaited return of the Force. With the Rebels and Reds, let's start with that game at Brookie. They couldn't be separated even after Super Time. What did you make of it?
Oh, well, yeah, well, this is rugby's version of Golden Point, if you like, and it was quite ironic that we're actually at a rugby league ground in Brookvale Oval, but some of the players really didn't take to it all that well, because it was history, actually. It was the first time that we went into 2 periods of extra time, 5 minutes each way. But the Reds and the Rebels... The Rebels had a pretty good run against the Reds in recent years, and the couple of penalties to Tamua in the first half. It was a real bore-fest, really, but then we saw some good running rugby in the second half. Very slippery conditions, Danguna scoring, and you'll see some tries from Hodge and Meeks as well. And then right at the very death, it was Alex Murphy that was able to get the score line locked up at 18 all after the conversion from James O'Connor. So in the second half we saw 4 tries, and thank goodness for that, because in the first half it was really slow going, just 6 points through the boot of Matt Tamua. So we went into Super Time at the end, and I think it was the old cliche where both teams tried not to lose the game rather than win the game. So I think they're going to have to go back to a little bit of forward thinking when it comes to the Super Time or Golden Point. I can't believe that they didn't talk to some of the rugby league coaches maybe to find out what actually happens in the Golden Point era. But Bryce Hegarty had an opportunity to try and win the game right on halfway, and the penalty goal attempt just faded towards the end, but in the end they couldn't be separated. So history, yes, with our first Super Time, but 18 all, and I guess that was probably a fair result, but the Rebels were disappointed that they didn't close it out, because they were leading by 10 points with about 10 to go as well. So we had to settle for a draw and move on.
Yeah, the one that got away for the Rebels, no doubt about that. Elsewhere, the Waratahs were back at the SCG on Saturday night, and they spelled the party for the Western Force, who finally returned to Super Rugby after that 3-year exile. The men from WA looked good, at least for a little while.
Yes, for about 39 minutes they were looking really good as well. It was Pryor and also the returning fly half and John O'Lance who were guiding the Western Force around. They came up with a lot of enthusiasm. Young Byron Ralston, another one of the under-20 stars from last year, he scored the very first try in Super Rugby AU for the Western Force, and they got out to 14 points to 0 before Angus Bell was able to score right on the stroke of the half-time for the Waratahs. It was converted, so 14 points to 7 at the break. Will Harrison had a perfect night from the kicking tee again, and he just kept the scoreboard ticking over in the second half. Tom Staniforth coming off the bench and scoring for the Waratahs. So in the end it was 23 points to 14, a much needed victory for the new look Waratahs team. It wasn't perfect, very slow out of the blocks indeed, but they managed to get the job done. So it was their first win of the Super Rugby AU competition, and they've got a pretty good record at the SCG now. I reckon the Waratahs should be playing all of their games there if you look at the stats, because they're now 5 from 5. But great to see the Western Force back.
Absolutely they do, and just good to have the Western Force back, and you're right, they will improve, no doubt. Let's talk about what's going on over in New Zealand. It was the top of the table clash between the Crusaders and the Blues, and it certainly lived up to the hype.
Yeah, plenty of hype around this one. They're saying that some of the big games in Super Rugby Aotearoa basically test match standards, and you know, the crowds are there obviously, so that's helping the players more so than it's helping the players in the Aussie competition. But yeah, you can't argue, it's fantastic rugby across the Tasman at the moment, and the Crusaders a little slow out of the block, but they do finish strongly, and they are still unbeaten, 26 to 15 over the Blues. That was the top of the table clash, as you mentioned, in Christchurch, and the Crusaders have a bye this coming weekend, so they'll still remain unbeaten, obviously. But yeah, they're very, very good, aren't they? 26-15, the Crusaders. The Hurricanes and the Highlanders, that was the second game in Wellington, and the Hurricanes were too good in that one, 17 points to 11. But very competitive competition across the Tasman. Great skills, great running rugby, but they are a few weeks ahead of the Aussies. So that's the benchmark, and now we just have to hope that the Aussies in Super Rugby AU can actually improve from week to week.
Clarkie, we are running out of time, but before I let you go, I guess a war of words is breaking out between Australia and New Zealand rugby. New Zealand wanted to come up with this idea of including their 5 teams, 3 from Australia, maybe 1 from Pacific Islands. Australian rugby respond by saying, we'll go at it our own. Now, Steve Hansen says, we owe Australia nothing. Why can't we all just get along?
Yeah, indeed. And my understanding, Scott, was that there was some pretty good dialogue going on at the board level and also at the CEO level, but things have just changed in the last week or so, and they're being bullies basically, and I think they want a bigger slice of the action as well, because if we do have a Trans-Tasman competition, the Kiwis will want a bigger slice of the broadcast money, the sponsorship money, if you like. But I think there's still a lot of water to go under the bridge before we settle on this one. But I agree with Hamish McLennan, the chairman of Rugby Australia. I think we have to stand our ground, and I would like to see 5 Australian teams in that Trans-Tasman competition if it eventuates next year, because you know, Australian rugby just can't run on 2 professional teams, let's face it.
Yeah, I agree with you there, Clarkie. We'll see how it plays out. Looking forward to whatever Super Rugby looks like next year. We've run out of time, but we'll see you next week for sure.